Welcome to the Humanergy Leadership Podcast, where we tackle your toughest leadership challenges and share practical tools to help you lead with impact. Well, welcome to this episode of the Humanergy Leadership Podcast. My name's David Wheatley and I'm your host, and I'm joined today by our wonderful doctors, Dr. Judy Brown and Dr. Rick Eigenbrod, who are on either coast of the USA, waiting to give us our what could be Boxing Day Christmas wisdom on the structure that is necessary to help create high-performing teams. And as many of you may be aware, down in the bottom corner here is a great book called What Great Teams Do Great that comes out of Humanergy. But one of the questions we're looking at today is, are there some structural things that actually support teams that's more than just the people? So that was our question, Rick. What's your kickoff thoughts?
Well, David, I don't think we could talk about teams and team development without referencing the fabulous work that you do and the program you have. Can you put that up for a second? Do you have access to it?
Funnily enough, I had it queued up and ready to go. So
there you go.
And so for those that are just listening, because we do have the video and the audio version, if you're listening, if you pop to humanergy.com, there's a drop down called Tools. And in the tools, you'll see the What Great Teams Do Great model.
I was familiar with this, David, from our past conversations, and I was so taken by what you have here, the richness of it. It's so comprehensive. You've covered everything, and it's a wonderful model. And as a tool to help teams do two things: work on what's the nature of their work and how they're going to work together to do it. You've got it covered. So here you have things like, what is the external reality? What do we do? What are our values, et cetera? It's just really comprehensive. If I boil that down, what you're really helping people with this model is how to tackle two things, what I call task functions and maintenance functions. Task functions are what do we do? Maintenance functions are how do we go about doing it? And you provide them with a tool, with a way to think about addressing those two issues. So I think it's a great place to start. And in our previous conversations, I got to thinking about this issue about teams. And I've been invited, as you have, and Judy has, to talk about teams. And one of the things I found is that my thinking has sort of drifted away from the mainstream. And I've sort of taken my thinking down. So if you look at the model you use, David, if I would ask this question, if I make a fundamental assumption about this, it all depends, all of this that you're offering them as a tool, really great tool, all of it depends on their capacity for collaboration. Mm-hmm. Would you agree?
Mm-hmm. Yes, and some of it addresses that capacity for collaboration, yeah.
Absolutely. That's the maintenance function. So if you look at, what struck me is how much money, time, energy, and effort we spend as organizations to try and help people do what you're helping them do, which is to do these two tasks on the basis of their capacity for collaboration. So what hit me is, what is the basic assumption underneath our approach to teams? And I'll ask you two to pop in here. Do you think, by watching what we do and what our work with teams, are we assuming that we have to teach people how to collaborate? Or do we assume that people already naturally will collaborate, that it's in our evolutionary history, that you don't have to tell musk oxes how to form a circle, you don't have to teach wolves how to pack up, you don't need to teach bees how to hive, you don't need to teach ants how to hill, etc., and that there's a natural inclination in us based in evolution that is already that the inclination to collaboration is already there. And I think those two, asking that question really leads you down two different paths. So I thought it might be interesting to go down the road less traveled, if you will, and think about collaboration is something that is in our DNA. And if that's true, then maybe the issue is we don't have to teach them how to collaborate. We have to get out of the way of their.
I think it's a great concept, and I certainly want to keep pulling on that thread. And I think there's another piece to it. In my mind, I experienced some of this yesterday with a group, that sometimes we've taught people to stop collaborating. Yes. Because of some of the structures that we put in place. And so we sometimes need to remind them of collaboration. So a lot of what I find I'm doing is reminding people of how to collaborate appropriately. They probably, well, they could. You give people like 10 minutes, they could draw this model from their own experience. And
and what I would say is that our history, the three of us, of doing these podcasts comes out of the natural fun of collaborating. I mean, to Rick's theme, we really, in some ways, have just found that it's fun, it's full of learning, it's something we're happy to do. So, Rick, you want to keep pulling on that thread a bit further?
Before it does, I just want to pull on that because, Judy, what you're saying, this all started 30 years ago when two consultants were in the same manufacturing plant and chose to look at collaboration rather than competition. And I see, sometimes they say there's nothing worse than having two consultants in the same room because they'll go after each other rather than support the client. And what you and I were doing was saying, hey, we can do this better together than we can separately. So I think there is some natural inclination, and there's some structural training out of that way as well, which I'd be interested to pursue with Rick.
Yeah, I think it's sort of like it changes our mindset, David. And an examples you and Judy gave are wonderful. It's like maybe what we need to do, maybe their lack of collaboration in some way because of some things makes total sense to them to not do that, to not. Right. So I'd like to look at the things, offer some thoughts about ways in which we are getting in the way of the natural flow and the natural expression of collaboration. And I want to focus primarily on what I want to call structural issues. Okay?
Yep. You're on.
So let me ask you this question. If you two went into a group and asked the group, who runs this business? What do you think they'd say that?
Well, they point to some boss character.
Right.
Yeah.
Point up.
Exactly. And therein lies a part of the issue. That there's a structure called a mind. There are sort of physical structures, but there are structures called in the mind. And if you look at, I really love Smith and Katzenbach's work, The Wisdom of Teams. If you look at what they say is a hallmark of teams, there are three things essentially. One is they are accountable for the whole. They produce results greater than the sum of the parts, and it's high levels of interdependence. Mm-hmm. Now think about it. If a team had that mindset, and you ask that same question, who's responsible for, they would say, well, we are.
Yeah.
Getting there is really the issue. So what can we do? And I'm going to suggest, let's look at ways in which things I'm going to call structured. Judy, I think you called them design issues in our conversation. I want to mention a couple and just, take a slightly different tack. One of the, in structured, in some way, we hear about culture. What is it? Cultures trumps strategy.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's the same. Well, I think structure trumps everything else.
Mm-hmm.
So let me ask you a question. Here's an example of structure. David, you were a Bobby, right?
Way back.
Way. I just like, I'm so tickled I know somebody that was a Bobby. So let me ask you both, you have to take a whack at this. In terms of what creates the greatest traffic flow? Stoplights, stop signs, or roundabouts?
I think the Mythbusters actually tackled that one, didn't they? And they came up with roundabouts as the most fluid way and actually reduces accidents at the same time.
Bingo, David. Structure.
Design.
Design, Judy. It turns out that, other than big, where we have these big high volume traffic, that roundabouts have greater flow, they have less accidents, and in places where you have red lights and stop signs, the structural issue, the structure of red lights and stop signs, when it goes wrong, people get out of their car and fight with each other. It was my turn. No, it was my turn. What are you doing? I think if we take that notion and say structural issues that are unresolved get addressed at an interpersonal level.
Wow.
And we should not be doing so.
And it looks like it's personalities.
It looks like, he's got road rage, and this one over here doesn't follow the rules, and
right.
And you can see it over and over in our experience in companies where the structural or system dynamics, people to fight with each other. And so we end up bringing people together in a room to address at an interpersonal level what is basically a system dynamic.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because we're actually dealing with the symptom, not the cause.
Exactly, David. So let me give you a couple examples I thought about, and I'd love you guys to answer, to pop in here as we always do. So if I asked the group, or if I asked you, let's use the senior team, okay, rather than below. If I ask you, who gets to go in the room?
Who the senior team is?
Sorry?
You're asking who the senior team is?
Yeah, I'm saying if we, rather than focus on lower teams and stuff, it's easier to focus on senior team. What is the requirement for admission to be in the room when the senior team meets? What's the requirement for admission?
Well, traditionally it's the structure that says you're already on the senior team because you've reached this level. I think that it's interesting because what you're alluding to, and it comes into some of the work we do around some meeting structure, is do you have the right people in the room to help get to the solution that you want to get to, which could then expand that away from I've got a C in front of my title.
Right.
David, I think we're really on to something here that's unexamined and taken for granted. And the minute you take for granted that you have a ticket to admission into the senior team, which has to collaborate in order to do everything else we've talked about, you are inviting a problem. I took the liberty to call some friends who work with teams a lot and ask this question of them about what percentage of the teams that you work with do you think would be called high performance teams? And their answer is a very low percentage. I then asked them, I said to them, I sometimes when I'm starting maybe to work with a team, I'll ask the leader, how many on your team are keepers? And one of my colleagues said, I asked the question, if you were leaving, how many of your team members would you poach?
Mm-hmm.
And then variants of that amongst my colleagues, and no one said that the boss would say everybody. So let's pause for a minute and think about the impact of having one wrong person in the room. And we have been there. We have seen that.
So, Rick, let me step back. The question is, you're the CEO and you are about to leave and start another organization that matters a lot to you. How many of your current team would you take with you? And you're saying the answer is almost universally not all of them.
Exactly, Judy.
It's interesting. And I do an exercise with groups. I think I shared this with Rick earlier, that when I'm working with a leadership team over a long period of time, about once a year, I'll get them to put their org chart up on the wall. And we give the senior team a red, yellow, and green pen. And you go around and you put a dot next to all the different people on the team. And the green means I had poached them. The red means I wouldn't hire them if you pushed me. And the yellow means it really depends on the role and the time and the position. And then we have the conversation about the greens, because the ones with all the green dots are high potential, high performance. Let's make sure we do everything. And then the ones with measles, the question is, why haven't they gone? So if there's so many red dots, why haven't we created a structure for them to go? Now, the yellow ones, you can keep around because they have a purpose and a role. But if there's any red dots up there, it's a big question.
So David, I think right now the obvious question is how come they're in the room? Well, we all, we can go down that road and we won't. But what I would say is, if you have even one person in the room that shouldn't be there, you have seriously affected the capacity of the organization to do the task that you help them with, which really depends on their ability to collaborate. And we can think of all those one-off characters in the room that we've run into that take time, energy, effort, et cetera, et cetera. And one of the things that's always struck me is a rule of thumb for me with leaders and teams is you never sub-optimize the whole to optimize a part. In other words, the people in the room who are trying to get the work done are paying the price, if you will, for having that person in the room, not the least of which is resentment of everybody knows they shouldn't be in the room and you and the boss let them in. Mm-hmm. And we are paying the cost of that in time, energy, effort, and effectiveness.
And even if you didn't let them in, the fact that you've not walked them off is the other thing, isn't it? It's just quite often it's a matter of if you're putting up with this behavior, you're creating the lowest common denominator,
and I'm sorry, David.
No, I'm good.
Yeah, it's a structural issue. Who's in the room? So how do you think about who gets to go in the room and who doesn't if we don't do it on the basis of title? And I thought about this concept. A friend of mine, dear colleague, used to have a saying about the company with the most grown-ups wins. And I think the team with the most grown-ups is the team that wins in the sense of has the capacity to do the work that needs to be done in collaboration. Because if we look at one requirement to entry is what is the developmental level of that person coming into the room. Now, this can seem a little bit academic or whatever. I really love Kagan's stages of development. And you can go into it and read it. But let me give you an idea. And think about people you've seen like this at this stage of development. Because the notion is the stage of development of any individual defines the capacity they have to do certain work, right? So here's an example, and I read. There's a really lower level, which is like a kid. But stage 2, the imperial mind, which we associate with adolescence. And it's about, at this stage, your concern is getting your needs met over everything else. Your fear is that your own needs will not be met. This is a person who comes in the room and cannot think broadly in terms of we together are accountable for the whole.
Mhm.
And I cannot get my needs met in the service of something greater being met, right? And we know the person and how they act in a room. They can't separate having their say and having their way, right? So
Mhm.
that's stage two. The socialized mind, stage three, are adults, and I read. Um, the
Mhm.
most important things in stage two are personal needs and interests. In stage three, the most important things are the ideas, norms, and beliefs of people and systems around. For example, society, culture, etc. What they do and how they function is based more on their attention to the rules, the norms, what others think, etc., etc. And then there's a stage four, which is
Mhm.
self-authored mind, which he calls developed adults. Their priority is on moving away from being defined by other people or just our own needs. And we believe our thoughts and beliefs and feelings are interdependent. And
So I just want to
ability,
just take a pause on that for a minute, Rick, because at the heart of the What Great Teams Do Great model, if I just come back to that, is another model, which is that leadership is about the choices we make that influence and impact the people around us.
yes,
And what you end up with is what we call our four choices model that looks like this if you're watching, and you can find that at humanergy.com in the tools drop down too.
Mhm.
One of the things that we discovered recently, because really my job for the last 30 years has been helping people make more choices in the top half than the bottom half. And
Mhm.
that's defined by clarity around the greater good
yes.
rather than a self-focus at the bottom. So you can
And
see where I'm going with this, because somebody shared with us recently that this greater good thinking is a privilege.
I
And
Mhm.
they overlaid Maslow on top of it and said, if you're at the bottom of Maslow, you can't even get there. And what
right,
you're doing is overlaying Kagan on the top of it and saying, if you're at the bottom of Kagan, you can't even get to that greater good thinking because
Right.
your physiology won't let you.
perfect, David. What we're saying is there is a hidden structure that affects a group's performance that's called level of development. And whether we use Maslow or the model you put up or Kagan, the level of development matters because it's associated with certain behaviors, capacities, mindsets, etc. And so we have seen people in the room who are adolescents. If you look at their behavior, it's adolescent behavior. One of the things I'll do when I'm coaching someone who's struggling with an employee or colleague and whatever, I'll ask them this question: how old is this person? And they'll tell me they're 42. I said, no, think of their behavior. Now tell me how old they are. And when they tell me, I'm no more than 2 years off of what they pick. And it's almost always in the teen.
I
And
mean, we're here in America in 2025.
oh,
Doesn't take us far to find examples of people who don't like questions being asked of them or call people names who ask them bad questions.
what,
Amen.
yeah, what level of development? So do we really need to go to Kagan and those things and bring ourselves up to speed on this dimension? I think it would be a great idea. But what we can do is look at behaviors. And
Right.
behaviors tell us the developmental level, and developmental level tells us about their capacity. So I think what I'm suggesting here is this business about who gets to go in a room and on what basis is hugely important. Hugely important. And one time I was in a group with a big tech firm, and one of the things on the agenda was the CTO was coming in to share the technology roadmap. It was awful. All they could beat on it, and well, I don't like this because my people aren't going to like that, and I'm going to do the other. And it's like it wasn't their technology roadmap, even though the technology roadmap was their future. It was his technology roadmap, and their capacity to get outside of themselves almost to a person, which is really so you can guess what it was like. So let me offer you one more structural thing. I think that hit me. One is what I call boundary conditions. And the team said, it's not okay to do this, it's okay to do that. Another one I thought about is people coming in the room, are they required to have literacy about the whole business?
Right.
Judy, you want to say something about that?
Just that they're required to understand the dynamics of the entire business, not just the function for which they have responsibility. There's another piece of it that that's on my mind a lot, which is sometimes they're they don't know how to interact in a more productive way. So I think in the work that I've done, often the leverage is in taking a group of people. I usually work with a group of people over a year and in a leadership development program. And what we do is focus on the beginning part of their getting to know each other so that they have an entirely different set of structures in place, so that hang on a second, I want to make sure that
we heard you. You froze for a second, but we heard
okay,
you.
but yeah. So that, for instance, if a team is getting together for the first time, if the automatic structure is a check-in with a worthwhile question, and you hear from everybody one at a time without interruption, then you've set, to use your term, Rick, boundary conditions. You set patterns in place that are initial conditions, and people get used to the initial conditions. Before we start the work, we get a sense of where these human beings are coming from. Before we end up disagreeing about something, we practice active and productive disagreement, which means let me tell you how it is that I have come to see this way. And now tell me how you have come to see this so differently. I mean, those are practices. And if you put them in place repeatedly enough, people begin to get them. And it changes the ability of some people who enter the room as 5-year-olds to at least stretch to being 36, because
it's interesting because and Judy, I think you've done some pieces on this, but I'm immediately thinking about the Challenger disaster report and
yes.
The fact that the structure was such that the engineers were listened to, the
Yes.
senior engineers, and after the report, well, they had to rebuild the structure to make sure that the small voices had a voice too.
That's absolutely right. Yep.
Yeah, because people had been pointing this out, but nobody had been listening.
Well, and that is an example of a particular function dominating as opposed to the whole picture being in people's heads. So, and of course, the challenge is that in days when we're worried about whether or not a given organization is doing well financially, we overlean toward the finance guys. Or we're worried that we're behind with technology, we listen to the technology guys no matter what. Guys being a generic for both men and women. So simply noticing where are we exhibiting biases for particular points of view that then drive out the larger picture that Rick is reminding us we need to all have in mind. So anyway.
You touched on one structural issue that I'll just mention, and that's the reward system.
Amen.
No matter if you're on a senior team, no matter how the company performs, you get your big fat salary. You may not get your bonus, but you still get your big fat salary. This is really unique. I was talking to somebody, they were in the financial service business, and this blew me away. He said, if we as a company don't make our our goals, the difference in some proportion will come out of each one of our salaries. Can you imagine?
Perfect.
Because we're accountable for the whole. Accountability is consequence. And it doesn't mean you just don't get more. It means it hurts. Think about the difference in how we behave and act if we are in some way paying the freight on the lack of results that we commonly create.
Which is really designing a system that rewards and penalizes performance in both, because our systems in America tend to reward performance, but they don't recognize underperformance apart from occasionally somebody gets fired. So,
right.
But it's not owned in that same way.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we all, example after example after example of where somehow or another we are not requiring people to think and operate in the service of a greater good, in the service of a whole that's bigger than me, my company, etc. I was in a room once with everybody was fighting about whether or not some software should be, it's customized versus something else, more general, whatever. And there was a guy, the guy I was coaching. I said, if you were 2 levels up from you, which way would you go? And he told me. I said, but that's the opposite of what you've been fighting for in there. And he said, well, yeah, because if we went that way, I'd have to go back and explain to my team why we're doing it our way. Can you believe?
There's a news article today about an organization I've been working with, and I've been working at the upper middle levels, and we've been doing some stuff around what great teams do great, and it was working really well, but there was always this sense of we could never do it completely because of something else. And this article's come out that says there's reports of a culture of authoritarianism from the top of the organization. And that it's been all a matter of drive for the number, because that number gives me the biggest bonus.
Yeah.
And if you're not driving that number, and the unfortunate thing is the leader has been successful, and she's managing to upset the entire organization on the back of this drive for this number that makes me the biggest reward. Mm-hmm. And yet my belief, and I think what we're talking about here, is if you took that and created ownership across the set, you would get an even bigger reward from the collective.
Right. It's the difference between ownership and compliance, right? And
there's people leaving this organization because they don't want to be in that compliant mode.
So I think, just to kind of summarize, for me, I really appreciate the topic we've chosen, because it got me thinking about how I think about these things. And, in some way, maybe to sum up, we need to think about all the things we're doing to keep people from doing what we want them to do, and would come naturally if we got out of their way.
Right. There's a question that I've got in here, Rick, and the words I wrote down are ego and emotional intelligence. Because in order, when you look at things like we have to redesign the structure for roundabouts, we have to make sure we got adults in the room, we have to set the appropriate boundary conditions and reward conditions. A lot of that done for the whole requires ego to get out of the way. And that then how we communicate, how we go about that, requires phenomenal amounts of emotional intelligence.
I totally agree, David. My quick summary is we need people not with big egos, but with big selves, a big self-developed self.
And I think it's interesting, because that means I've been doing the inward work.
Yes.
Which then takes care of any outward work.
Exactly.
Right. Yeah. Leadership is an inside job.
Exactly.
Operating from that model.
Yeah.
And
but it's interesting, isn't it? If all the rewards are externally based, then that's what's driving that immaturity in some ways, the teenage behavior.
And it tolerates it. And we go, well, this doesn't make sense. No, for them, because of the conditions we've set up, because of the structural issues, they're doing what makes total sense. The reward system rewards me not for being a grown up. It rewards me for being, operating at a higher level, looking at the whole. It rewards me for looking at the piece parts and my piece part.
Right.
It
I keep a
drives
book on my
up.
desk here. I don't know if Judy knows this one, but I keep a book on my desk. It's called Markings by a guy called Dag
Doc,
Hammarskjöld. Dag Hammarskjöld was the United Nations Secretary
Yeah.
General in the 60s, I think it was. And he would go into the mountains on a regular basis with just a notebook and write his thoughts. And that's what makes up this book. And one of my favorite lines in it is the longest journey of them all is the journey inwards.
right. And that book is on my bookshelf as well.
Totally true.
Yeah, it's true.
And so if I'm the CEO, one of the conditions for getting getting access, getting in the room, is your level of development, which inferentially means you are required to take on a regular basis your own development as a human being in whatever you choose. But if I'm not seeing that you are invested in that, you're going to lose your ticket.
And I think we're coming up our time. And I think that's a good way if we can summarize that, because what you're saying is if you're a senior leader and you're not doing the inner work, then there's your biggest opportunity. And the three of us all do that for a living, is help CEOs and senior leaders do their inner work. And as somebody said to me recently, your job's to hold up a mirror and occasionally hit me over the head with it, which I really liked. But you say that's the first thing is, are you as a senior leader doing the inner work to develop the maturity and to stabilize the ego in such a way that you're part of the greater good? I think the second thing there is, are you designing roundabouts in your organization? I love that analogy, so that there's flow and there's fluidity and there's increased safety with that. Are we making sure we've got adults in the room? And that's not saying we can't have fun and we can't enjoy ourselves and everything else, but the level of maturity and the thinking, and I love that Kagan structure on that, is we've got the right people in the room. And are we setting the right boundary and reward conditions to drive the behaviors that will get the collective to the best answer?
Right. Amen.
Fabulous, David. Wow.
Well, cool. And if you need help with that inner work, and then Rick and Judy are semi-retired, but they might take on some work if you ask them nicely. I've got a whole team of people who would happily take on that work as well. And we'd love to support you here at Humanergy. And if you want to start exploring, Humanergy has a First Friday sessions, the first Friday of every month. You can join us on Zoom at noon Eastern time. And you can check that out at humanergy.com and start exploring that leadership journey with a bunch of other leaders that are on that inner work path. So we'd love to see you there. Otherwise, Rick, Judy, thank you very much. Have a wonderful holiday and look forward to more wisdom in the new year. That was the Humanergy Leadership Podcast. Make sure you like and subscribe and visit humanergy.com for many more resources.